So I think it's about 2 minutes in already, and I'm going to start. This. All right, now I'm hyped up. Okay, so designing Journey. Journey took us 3 years to make, but the company, That Game Company, was started in 2006. In the first 3 years, we were making other games. So far we've made 3 games on the PlayStation console: Flow, Flower, and Journey. This is the Journey team at the end of the development. Here's a celebration, and we've made Scar Forever team member. It's a small team. There's 12 people here. When we started making Journey, it was 7 guys after the finishing Flower. Over the course, various people come and leave, and most of them were on the stage last night. We actually, before Journey, we've already kind of made quite a few awards, which I'm proud of. And now with Journey, it's kind of going crazy. But what I'm most proud of is actually these kind of association of video game with museum and art, and some other industry giving our game nominations and awards. Because deep down, I always wanted games to be accepted by, I guess, the mass. So a lot of people ask us, how did you guys do it? You don't even have a PR department, but we see you in the news all the time. I'm like, well, I guess maybe the difference is like we view game development from a very different perspective. I remember when I was at GDC in 2004, 2005, we were talking about innovating games around gameplay mechanics. There are various ways you can innovate games. You can make a new technology and build a new game around it. You can create a unique art style and build a game around it. But when we approach innovation, we like to look at it from the perspective of emotion. I kind of see games as an entertainment, and when I think about entertainment as a whole, I see it as a kind of industry to fulfill human desire. Just like food and water, when a human have a craving for emotion, there's various ways you can get it through various medium. It just happened to be interactive medium can provide entertainment, can provide various emotions. People often compare games to film, and if you look at film, which has grown quite mature, and the genres of the film are often divided based on the feeling, and from negative to positive. But when I look at video game genres, and particularly the early video games, these are what I consider the arcade era, even though Angry Birds and Bejeweled are here. I mean, I consider they are the type of game which was very popular in the early days. And these games are about the sense of accomplishment. You're really getting better at performing certain skill. The feeling of achievement is really a powerful emotion that is often not achievable in cinema. And I think that is why, in the early age, this emotion has been explored a lot. And over the past 20 years, games has becoming bigger and bigger, and particularly the console game, with the teenagers and younger male. And if you look at the games that are appealing to this particular age group, a lot of them are about empowerment. And particularly when you think about what this age group people need emotionally, most of them are in school. They were told not to do certain things, and in the home, they can't drive, they can't drink, they can't leave school. There's a lot of limitation about the freedom. So in a way, a feeling of freedom is something that really appealed to this age group. But as I grow older, I have the freedom. I have a job. I have the money. I can go anywhere I want to. I start to find it's less appealing to me. And I started playing less and less games. And if you look at the innovation on emotion in the history of video game, I can recall a couple. Like for example, Sims. Sims is the first game that gives me a feeling of socializing with someone, and that is huge. That's like, before multiplayer even existed, this single player game can give me the feeling of connection and relationship. And I think that's why it has a huge hit, and has a very different appeal to different demographics. So when we started that game company, we wanted to push the boundary of what kind of emotion can games communicate to the players. And we thought, if there's a variety of feelings that's available in the entertainment, it is going to be a healthy media. In gaming, it will be making the gaming a more healthy medium. And for player, if all they play is the empowerment, if they have new feelings, it will also be healthy for them. And so now I'm just going to talk about Journey. This is why you're here. So in early 2006, this is before That Game Company was created, I already have this idea for Journey. At the time, it was about the third year I've been playing World of Warcraft. I started since early alpha because my friends works in Blizzard. I feel super privileged to be able to play this game before everybody. But it was also the time I started getting really sick of World of Warcraft. And the reason for that is that, most of the time I'm really busy working at school, and I almost have no social life. So being online, being with other people, the real people, they are on the internet, is something that makes me feel close and makes me feel less lonely. So when I'm playing game online, I wanted to have emotional exchange with the other player. So, kind of wanted to have romance or friendship. But most of the time, the player doesn't care about those things. They like to talk about the strategy, how you're supposed to kill this boss, move over to the left, and you're slow. And all they will say, no, I wanted this loot, and this is my turn. You're not supposed to get it. And so I was kind of disappointed because the more I play this game, the more people I encounter, the more I realize I have no connection with any of these people. They just remind me that I'm a lonely person. And so it's kind of sad. So I was hoping that there would be a different type of game out there that will satisfy my desire, I guess, to have a connection with people. And so, as you can tell, I'm an introvert. I don't like to go to parties or bars. So I was imagining this online world where there's no longer the difference between, first of all, there's no enemies you can kill, and there's no armor sets, I'm platinum and you're only bronze, right? I want everybody to forget about those material things and just focusing on the fact that we are all human. And so the other thing I got quite annoyed is a lot of people will check to see if you're a guy or a girl in these online games, and it's always a sad ending. So I really want to see a game where there's no difference of gender and age. And yeah, sometimes I realize this guy I really have a connection to during playing certain raids is actually a 12-year-old boy, and I just suddenly feel like such a disappointment. So I want to see a world where everybody is the same. You can't tell how old they are, what their gender is. They are all on their path searching for something. Something, I don't know what that is. And so I have this scene here where one person is just simply standing on a bridge, looking down in the waterfall, and I'm just imagining a scenario where I can just walk up to him without a words, and he's just staring at the waterfall, and I decided to stop and look into the waterfall and thinking, why is he looking at there? And the very action of stopping and being next to someone and not keep moving on give me a feeling that moment we're together. We're together for this. But back then, I was thinking about MMO because all I play is World of Warcraft. So there's supposed to be lots of players, and this scene is something I really liked. I want to see in a game one day. It's basically, I also just finished Shadow of the Colossus. How ridiculous that is. So in the scene, there are these dark pillars. They are actually the legs of the giants, and they are walking through the snowfield, kicking up all the dust. So it's very foggy and dusty, and you can't see it in the front. And you guys have to keep silent, because if you make noise, the giants will notice you. So you have to slowly kind of trudge through this plain and relying on the guy in front of you to lead you away from danger, and at the same time being relied upon by the person behind you. And that feeling is something I really want to experience in this game. But we had no money, and there's no That Game Company back then. So we were very, very lucky to be able to find a deal to work with Sony. So they helped us to build the previous two games. Flow took us a year, Flower 2 years. And so when we finished Flower, we say, okay, finally, let's make our third game. And I feel like we're finally ready to tackle online gameplay. So we want to take what we learned from Flow and Flower and trying to induce a new emotion between two strangers online. And when thinking about the emotion, we're going back to this pie chart here, and I mentioned earlier on there's social games like Sims, but this is also the era 2009 when Facebook gets big, right? The social game become big. People are talking about social games, but I look at the social games, I look at the mechanics, the interactions. They're not really about socializing. It's more like exchanging numbers and resource management, which reminds me more of the earliest games. And when I think about social emotions, Sims was one of them. And when I play Guitar Hero, I have a great social bonding with people playing with me. And even playing Minecraft, well, Minecraft is recent, but I'm just trying to say that there are interactions that actually make you social. So, my habit, with the previous game is trying to make an emotion that's stronger and that's different. So I really know that, it's some emotion there that's going to bind people. They're going to have a deeper connection after they finish the game. But I have no idea what is the emotion. So it took us quite a while to search for exactly what is the emotion behind social interactivity. So I first looked around at the online games that's popular on the console. There's a lot of team fights or team survival, co-op. It was very interesting for me to look at kind of like what is the average noise. If you think about online games, people keep telling me how they hated online players, and then people are mean online. They don't want to know who they are. I really want to kind of make something that makes them feel differently, or make people trust each other better. And I was very lucky that I have met quite a few astronauts in my life and talked to them about the experience in the space. So they talk about how there's this weird myth between all the astronauts who went to the moon, that after they came back, they all become very, very spiritual and religious. I mean, that's kind of like a joke I heard from a lunch table, right? And they say there must be something mysterious about the moon that really transformed these people who went there. And later on, I met the guy who drove the first moon buggy. And I asked him, so what is so special about the moon that makes these people feel different after they come back? And he said, on the moon there's nothing. There's no sound because there's no air. It's utterly quiet. And the Earth is so small, it's like your thumbnail. You can just cover it up, And you're on this strange place where there's nothing and there's no sound. And you just can't stop but thinking, why? Why are we here? What about the rest of the universe? Because everything these astronauts, they're mostly scientists. They know a lot about Earth, but all of a sudden, they're facing with a lot of unknown. And I learned psychology. I know that the sense of awe and unknown is directly tied to a lot of religious meanings. And so it's kind of an inspiration. It might not directly connect to what the game is, but it kind of inspired me looking at our life today. We are kind of super empowered by technology today. We can move really, really fast. We can, live and work above the clouds. We can talk to anybody at anywhere at any time. And in our pocket or our bag, we carry the entire knowledge that human has ever gathered. It makes me feel powerful because if I get to bring the God just today to 10 years ago, they will think I'm a god. I know everything. I can do anything. But it also kind of makes me feel like we are living in a life where we're trapped by these empowerment. We can't simply live without them anymore. And when you look at video games, and particularly the popular commercial games, most of these characters are kind of, carrying something symbolize power. And the gameplay, I mentioned earlier, is mostly about empowerment. And when you have empowerment, when you put a bunch of people in that environment, their first reaction is, how am I going to apply my power on someone else, right? If you give me a gun and you lock me up with another guy in a room, I think I'm going to use it someday. So the problem is, when you have a lot of power, even though the game is supposed to be about survival and bonding and collaboration, most of the time you're applying your power. Like, let's say I'm shooting Left 4 Dead, and if my teammates block me, I'm like, get away! I'm gonna shoot this zombie. And the only time I felt a connection while playing Left 4 Dead is when someone was patching me up, and I really feel something. But too bad, it's so rare. Most of the time, majority of the time, I'm still applying power. So when I think about redesign a social experience, that's something that will connect people together, I think the very first important thing is to reverse the power relationship between the players and the world. The player needs to be less powerful, and the monster needs to be more powerful. And then you will think about collaborating with other people. And in a lot of games today, it's mostly about achievements, and challenge about conquering the monster. And too bad the monster logo looks like the Android logo. It has no indication here. So what I'm trying to see is that in an online game, most people think about getting items and getting power, and think less about the other player. And particularly in World of Warcraft, most of the time, I don't think about the player, only when I'm like, this guy is too difficult to beat. I need another guy to help me to beat this boss. And I kind of think of them as a tool to get the treasure afterwards. And I want to see a reverse. I want to see the treasure and the monsters only being a mean to make me realize how awesome the other player are. In most of the online games, it's about shooting, but I wanted to see an online game where the skills the player gain and improve over time is actually about communicating emotions and really feel each other rather than just like how accurate your gunshot is. So the problem, trying to create that word is very difficult because in a lot of modern day games, the theme of war is just too noisy. You just don't have time to look at the other friend when a tank and a helicopter is attacking you. So I thought, well, it's easy. The first thing is we should get rid of the noise, and we just keep a game to focus on people. And then we have that problem where if I have a gun, I'm going to use it, so we have to ditch that. And then it starts to get interesting. A bunch of people in a lobby, kind of like waiting before the raid starts. They start to talk to each other. But I kind of wanted to have more structure. So I thought, well, what if we have less people? It's easier to design when you have less people. Let's say we are in a very hazardous environment. Not many people can survive, and there's only 2 people left. And then, all of a sudden, this guy in the distance become very, very interesting compared to, a constant warfare of action. So that's kind of the very beginning of Journey. We wanted to have a game which make you feel somewhat lonely, somewhat small, but you have a great sense of awe and the feeling of unknown towards the mystery behind this game world. But that's just a kind of emotion we identified. But to actually execute that emotion, we have to do a lot of prototyping because we have not seen a lot of games that's trying to achieve that. Maybe Myst or Shadow of the Colossus is the only two I can see that is actually having similar feeling. So when we prototype, I actually always start prototyping music. It's not the interactivity, because music is the most effective and powerful medium that can create emotion. So I work with Austin Wintory. By the way, he's Grammy nominated. So I was really lucky to have a music that he made pretty much like right at the beginning of the game development. So 4 months into Journey's development, our artist made this mock-up trailer with Austin's music, and I'm just going to play it here. And you can see it in the early days, our character looks like a ninja. And he still have like a human shape. He has arms, it's very much the early stage. But we know the world needs to make you feel big and inspiring, and you need to feel small. So it's kind of various landscape, but you can hear the music. That's the music we used in the end game. It's the music you would hear on a cross-media buy before you launch Journey. It has not changed. It just hit something strong that I really feel there's something there. And we kind of start to build the game around this music. And the mountain used to be a crevice of a canyon rather than a hill. So. All right, and so then we start to enter all kinds of round problems. Like I think the trailer is the only thing successful in the early day. Okay, let me show you something we learned. Right, we started prototyping with co-op because we know we wanted people to work with each other. So we started this prototype called Rope. So basically, it's a one-button game. You just press space. And rope is the action. In the chat bubble, it's the action. And you can see a long-legged guy can't break rock because he doesn't have arm. But the fat guy, he has strength, so he can break a rock. But still, the chance is not always 100%, right? And so as they collaborate, here's a rope, so they can climb up. So the long-legged guy runs fast, and he can jump through gaps. And so, well, he didn't do it that time. But with a rope, because anybody can lower a rope at any time, eventually with the chance, they can collaborate. And we thought this is a great game. You help each other. But then, the problem is like, what if you're playing alone? You can't play this game. And Sony keep telling us like this game could have a great multiplayer, but it needs to have a single player. Otherwise, you will not sell your game, right? And so we're like, okay, well, this doesn't work. And here's an example where two people are collaborating and they're pushing a heavy rock. I mean, this is a very common co-op features I think most co-op games have, right? But if you're alone, you can't even finish this level. Even though there's a great feeling of collaboration, it becomes quite a trouble for us when we wanted to design a game where it's possible to play alone. And the other thing, as you can see, most of the prototype early on is like Java and Flash. They're 2D prototypes. And stuff we thought was brilliant didn't work in 3D at all. So we started this idea about trail. So, if you walk in the desert, you can only see so far from the top down. How would you know there's other player? And even if the other player exists, if they're moving towards one direction, how are you ever going to catch up if you all have the same speed? So if you walk on other people's trail, you will speed up. And so eventually, as you explore, you will run into other player, and you can see the shout has been, in very early prototype. I think that was a success. But in here, I'm trying to show you that if the player can be next to each other, they become more strengthful and they can climb up rocks. But these mechanics, eventually, when you transfer into 3D, it's almost impossible to actually pull it off because cameras and other things. So here's another prototype we thought was smart is when the two people are traveling, they get to go faster because they can leapfrogging from each other and they can increase the speed. Another great idea we thought was smart, is the idea of kind of calling to distracting the monster. In Journey, you see the monster, right? But if you shout at them, then the monster want to attack you. So between the two players, you might be able to collaborate and distract the monster and to get through. But when we actually try to execute this idea in 3D, it's almost impossible to tell the distance between you and the monster and coordinate. This just way too hard. And it tells me that a top-down view is great for strategical maneuver and collaboration, but it's almost impossible in 3D. So here's another scenario which we really saw was a great idea, which also got killed. We thought about desert. Of course, there's sandstorm. So sandstorm is coming, and the people need to find a shelter. The shelter is kind of a gray color. And you can see the sandstorm keep going. And if they stay in the shelter too intimately, the color of them will change to pink. I don't know what that means. Maybe they're shy. And so this very scene of the sandstorm wiping the entire world was a very powerful emotional experience. But in the end, when we bring it to 3D, we realize how difficult it is to actually do a sandstorm, and we just couldn't do it. And there's also this idea about graphics as gameplay. This is something very unique in TGC. Internally we call it gameplay, which we are more of a gameplay company than gameplay mechanics company. What do I mean? So imagine you're in the desert and you're walking towards a mountain in the distance, and you've been walking. And the mountain is so far, there's almost nothing changing on the screen. And this is kind of how it feels early on in the journey, where we have to keep dropping breadcrumbs to keep the player feel like, oh, am I actually making some progress? The world is so big, we want it to feel epic, but then it's really boring to traverse through the land. And for quite a long time, we were like, this game is not fun at all. So in order to create feedback for simple traversal like walking, we added the sand trail. So at least you're enjoying something. You can sense how long you've been walked. And we wanted to have a lot more like dunes and things that would be passing by. So when you walk, the entire screen is giving you feedback rather than just staring at an image. So we went out to a real kind of desert beach. This is the Pismo Beach. And here's a video of our lead engineer, John Edwards, climbing the sand. And I'm like, if you jump off the sand, can you actually slide down, like sand slide? And so here I'm telling him, hey, let's try this. Let's try just jump off, see what's going to happen. So here he jumps down. And then just stopped, right? And how terrible is that? And so I wish in the ideal world he would just be sliding down, right? And that's what we did exactly in Journey, which is like you climb up kind of slowly, and then eventually you kind of like slide down on the other side. Yeah, it's kind of weird. It's like we are trying to capture realism, but we're trying to capture the realism that we wished. So then walking become interesting because every dune you climb up, you have this anticipation of what's behind it, and you also have a reward. So there's a lot more engagement in the basic movement, and there's no mechanics here really, just the feedback. So as we work on this game, we run into a lot of distractions. As a good designer, you need to be very clear about the experience you want and stay the hell away from the experience you don't want. So Journey is a very simple interface game because we wanted to make it for everybody. We want a kid to be able to pick up the game to play. We want to give this to my dad or my mom, and they should be able to just enjoy it rather than learning a lot about gaming. So when I think about online game, the first thing I think about is the online interface. This is Journey's online interface. There's another guy, so it's an online game, right? And then when I think about online games, before we made this game, it was like this, right? You have to figure out a lobby, check out a room, and check everybody's pin number, and make sure it's all green, and then you start the game, and you have to say, ready. And I just don't know how I'm going to explain what is a pin number to my mom. So we say, well, we have to hide all these interface. And the next problem is just the user IDs, right? Because player has been playing the aggressive competitive games, and their name tend to be very aggressive. This name is actually not too bad, and they actually take me out of the game, even with Harris Hilton. But I'm seeing Paris Hilton. I'm seeing real world. It takes so much effort for us to transport the player from their living room into a magical realm. And these names, these texts, just bring them back. And I really think in order to have them collaborate and connect, they have to forget these real-life things. And the next thing is people will say, oh, online game, I get to talk to my friends, right? I need to have voice chat, or at least I can type. And knowing online console games, I just really don't want to hear the voice of the 12-year-old boy. And who knows who's playing the games on the other side, right? And but Sony was talking to us that if you have friends invite, you can have a viral marketing, right? Because it's fun to play with friends, they will tell other players to buy the game. And we thought this is a good idea, but when you implement that, if you have two strangers on the internet and they can't chat, they can accept that. But if I'm playing with my best friend and he's on the internet and we can't chat, it's kind of frustrating. And because of that, we actually decided to not even support friends invite because it will break the integrity of the word. So the only way we allow players to connect with each other is at the very end of the game, after all the credits rolls up, the very end, we show you the ID of the other player. And so that way we can protect the feeling between the strangers. And the other distractions is in the early days when we tried 4-player co-op, we realized there are a lot of weird situations. Like after they play for a while, they start to talk about us versus them. They suck, we are great. And I'm thinking, well, sure, having competition is great for online games, but that's not the emotional connection I'm thinking about. And the worst case is when there are 3 players, they're a bigger group, and this single player is isolated. I remember talking to my professor, Tracy Fullerton, who's sitting here, and she told me she hated this game because she's an explorer. She wants to explore the game, but all the other testers wanted to move on. And she felt forced. She has to conform herself towards others. And so in the end, we start to focus on one-on-one interaction. But also based on that particular problem with the 3 versus 1, I want to bring this idea of collaboration and flow. So flow, originally, I learned it through making the single-player game because, as a psychology theory, flow is about the balance between the player's ability and the challenge of the game. And you want to make sure, no matter where the player evolves in the game, they're in this nice balance. But also, there's this concept of the flow for collaboration, or in Bernie DeKoven's word, collaboration, which is like in any group co-op, there's a balance between the individualism and the group conformity. You can't just be too much about yourself, then the group will abandon you. And you can't just always do what the group wants you to do, then you lose yourself. And the player needs to have the choice to actually navigate through the experience, to stay in the flow, and also to stay in the flow of collaboration. And that's really why we try really hard to create Journey's seamless online lobby system where we will match you up with all kinds of players, but some of them might not match with you. They might be explorer, but you wanted to finish the game as quick as possible. But we believe if you have the choice to walk away from a player, eventually you will run into someone who wants to do the same thing, who is the similar type of player, and then you would love to be next to the player. When they have the choice to leave, the co-op is actually more real and sincere, and I think it's possible to have a stronger emotional connection. And so in the end, Journey's online matching system is based on the physical distance. If someone's close to you, we will match you up. But if you don't like them, you start to kind of walk away. The system will disconnect them and find someone else. Another type of distraction, resource, right? In Journey, you go to pick up those cloth strands, and you fly, and you love them. And when two people who love strands, they meet, and one guy takes the resource and he flied, then the other guys hate you. And in fact, in our early days of playtesting, people were saying like, I really don't want to be with the other player. They don't belong here because they're going to steal my resource. So for quite a while, in order to compensate, we thought we have a great idea. We have the player who dropped the resource after they use them, so they don't actually consume resource. So maybe that way the player will love them. So this is an early stage kind of 3D prototype. And you can see if the player flies, he drops all these kind of strands right behind them. So for the other player, he can just pick them up and fly up for free. It's kind of like a communism thing. You share all the resource. But the problem is that even though mathematically you share it, psychologically you don't. A lot of player complains about how I picked up all these resources and I carried all the way to the other guy, and he got to use my resource to fly. He takes advantage of my labor, even though most of them are not intentional. And a lot of people feel kind of very weird when there's a guy stalking you and stay behind you and just pick up your stuff. And so they just think this is, they still feel like there's some kind of stealing happening. So in order to really eliminate that, so at least people don't hate each other, we decided to drop the idea of possession, like resource. We just have infinite resource, except the player have a limited pocket size. You can only carry this much money, right? So, and people go to the resource, they all pick up their money, and they can all fly, and they don't hate each other. And then, at some point, we have another distraction from physics. In most online games, there's no collision, so people can just walk through each other, because collision online is very difficult to do, and it causes all kinds of problems. And at some point, we talk about the two people helping each other to go through the rock. You can see in the 2D prototype, it's very easy. But to do this in 3D, you need to be able to carry the guy, push him up, and the other guy have to pull you up. So there's a lot of collision we have to, physics have to be implemented. So we thought, well, but this is going to make people trust and help each other even more. Let's do this. This is going to make this emotion deeper. So we added the physics so the player can actually push each other. They feel the existence of each other. This is great. But instead of helping each other to push them onto the rock, they like to push them onto something more exotic. And for quite a while, I thought it was just, those playtesters, they play too much Call of Duty. They're just mean, right? And then we were doing playtests at our own office. Our lead engineer, John Edwards, who was the guy who jumped off the sand, killed me. And multiple times. I'm like, wait, this game is about helping each other and having a connection, right? Why do you keep doing this? And he just stared at me laughing because we are just right across the office. I'm like, come on, revive me, right? And then I realized, for quite a while, I was disappointed about humanity. I was so disappointed. And one day, Kelly told me to meet her brother's girlfriend. She is a spiritual psychologist. So I talked to her about this very dilemma about humanity, right? And she said, "Oh, it's because your players, they're babies." What do I mean by that? Like when you transport yourself from the real world to a virtual space, particularly when character looks like dots, they don't carry the morality from our real life, right? It's like a new baby. And baby only seek for feedback. And pushing a guy to a rock has almost no feedback, right? But pushing a guy to kill them, there's animation, there's blood, there's a sound of crying, and there's a social anxiety of waiting you to revive them. It's so much more rewarding. Of course, the player wants to do that. So what I learned is that the morality doesn't necessarily carry over, and in order to shape players' behavior, you have to control the input and output. So in order to prevent this happen, we actually get rid of collision in the end. So what happens is instead of pushing each other when you're next to each other, you start to give each other money. And so people love to be next to each other because there's a lot of feedback, but there's no feedback by pushing them to a cliff or kill them. And now they can both fly just being next to each other. They love each other, And just these little tweaks about features can go a long way. And there's so many small things about Journey that just kind of like constantly play testing and realize it's not working. And now I'm going to talk about, I think the most important thing for Journey is once you figure out the mechanics, you really need to push for emotional catharsis. And catharsis is kind of like, what people would say, a climax of a great story, But what's important for catharsis is it's not an emotion, it's just an intensity. I think no matter what emotion you're pushing for, whether it's joy or sadness or sarcasm, all kinds of emotion, you need to push to a certain depth, a certain intensity, because otherwise, adults, myself as a gamer, I'm too jaded. I need to be really shaken and to be surprised to actually feel something. And so this is a typical 3-act structure from Hollywood. How you would structure the intensity of emotion in a story, hoping that at the very end, there's a huge rise. And that rise is the change of intensity, and that's the catharsis of emotion. So, for Journey, the feeling is awe and mystery, and we wanted to kind of be able to control that. And this is when I started to look into Joseph Campbell's work. He's a master about myth and awe. And this is where I actually got to learn the hero's journey in depth, because I keep hearing it, but never really pay attention to it. And the hero's journey is essentially a structure of storytelling about a transformation of human being. It can be something like a transformation of a farm boy into a galaxy saver, or some hacker guy turning into the one. And it could be also be used for more abstract story, like the transformation of a little lion into the king. So when I actually line up the transformation of the hero's journey, which is called the monomyth, with the intensity of the 3-act structure, and I'm thinking about like doing a transformation of a character's life from the birth to death. It's surprisingly aligned. It's almost like perfectly aligned. It's such a great 3-act story about a hero's journey, which is also a human's life. And I'm just, at that point, I'm so geeked out. I'm like, this is so perfect. People all figured it out a long time before we look into cinema and all these things. We have to try it out as a game. So we create an arc of journey, and then based on the arc, we create the landscape, the world of journey, which you can see from the altitude. It's almost like based on the arc. And then we figure out, the characters' growth from young to old, and they eventually transcend. And based on the storyline, we create the mood and the colors and the detail of each area in the world. And then based on that, we have even more detailed emotional arc with gameplay elements specified in this chart, and divide these large areas into smaller levels. So this is all done in the first year, in the first half year. So basically, we break all these nodes down into small scenarios of gameplay elements, storytelling elements, and the history elements. There's actually 2 storylines for Journey. But you can see, based on this arc, we have this intensity curve here. If I map it onto an axis, you can see basically we can use that as a guide to direct what we want in terms of gameplay. So on the positive side of the intensity, we want to make the player feel free. We want them to have lots of movement. We want them to feel energetic and feel connection with each other. And on the opposite end, and you can imagine what kind of emotion that is. When we work with artists, it's very easy to tell an artist to paint something that's very intense or very low. And it's easy to work with composers to get a music that feels sad or happy. But it's very hard to work on controls and gameplays, because what is a sad gameplay? There's almost no reference. And we, as game designer, we have a lot of vocabularies to refer from all the games in the past about how to create a sense of fun, a sense of achievement, and a sense of accomplishment and empowerment. But my knowledge about other emotions only through the games I've done. Flow and Flower, which is a Zen-like game and a love-giving and peaceful game. So it takes a lot of effort to explore these mechanics to follow the arc. At the end of the first year of the Journey development, the game supposed to look like this. This is the concept art Matt Nava has drawn. But this is what the game kind of looked like. We kind of blocked it out. And this is the second bridge area, which is supposed to look like this. We have some basic foundation of it. We actually blocked out the entire game before the first year. So we have the final mountain level and underground level, except this is the target of the emotion. This is how it feels. Nothing really kind of makes me feel anything. The game sucks. Nobody have any confidence it's going to do well, right? And so we keep pushing it. At the end of the second year, this is the trailer we made at the end of the second year. And you can see this is very similar to the final trailer. We have, except the sand is not as sparkling, and some of the model is not very polished. But you can see mostly the character is there, the scene is there, and the storyline is almost there. I'm going to save some time now. So this is the curve we measured at the end of the second year. It's basically there. Like we have the first 4 levels basically there. And we have a lot of people coming to play test. And the result is not good. And they say this game is really bad. Some people told me, before the final heaven level, when the player died, you should just cut it there, because the later part is making the game worse. I'm like, what? Really? So I looked at the game, and what happened is that if you look at the green curve, right, this is the final emotional rise. And that is not even bigger than the level where the water is kind of floating. And that's not even higher than the sand surfing level. It's not exciting. It's not satisfying. But the guy was saying, like, when he died and accidentally the game crashed, he was staring at the white screen for about 2 minutes without nobody noticing. And he was in a deep thinking. He was like, this is very serious tragedy. And he really liked it, And I started to look at why. I'm like, actually, if you jump from that level to the very bottom where you just died, it's the biggest emotional change. And it's actually, you reverse it, it's actually a catharsis of tragedy. But that's not what we intended. We're not trying to make a sad story here. So we actually took another year just to fix that problem. So what did we do to increase this Catharsis? So first, we have to make sure the mountain, the level before the final rise, is low enough. So what we changed is the mountain kind of feels long and shallow and tedious because it's just a lot of wind blowing at you, and it takes forever to walk over it. But we actually wanted to make it feel more struggling. So we create a completely new animation set. Animation sets is hundreds of animations, and we just make it for this level where you kind of feel weak walking against the wind, and climb slowly and jump slowly and shout weakly. And we actually change the physics of the scarf and the clothes so they actually, when they're frozen, they become heavy, they become lifeless. In the middle of the scene, the guardians, the serpents, usually just kind of stay above. They just kill other cloth creatures, being scary, but they never attack you. We actually make you to be attacked, and we make this shelter actually crushable, so it's no longer safe. And to extend the amount of struggling, we also need the player to spend longer time in the level. So we added 2 new areas just to extend how long it is. There's a sanctuary, which gives you a brief rest. And then there's this fortress area you have to go through. And then eventually you go to the final walk of death. And to make this area even work better, we have to figure out a way to continuously slow down the player's input. And we actually dim the light, because the light is a symbol of hope and goal. So when you actually die, there's no hope. We spend so much time tweaking the timing, right? A lot of times I thought 3 minutes is about the good time to walk to your death. But then, and then our team member were like, this is too long, right? And they wanted to be 30 seconds. I'm like, 30 seconds is not enough. I'm not even in the right mood yet. So it's just constantly back and forth, tweaking the exact right number where everybody's happy and for you to fall down. And then when we move to the summit, we have to make sure the summit is a lot more exciting, a lot more climatic, and a lot more free, right? What is the emotion of the intensity, right? Originally, summit actually looks like this at the end of the second year, but the whole game is on rail. So you just kind of like follow the rail, going through and seeing everything, but you don't have a lot of control. You can kind of like Star Fox a little bit, but because of that, I think that's why the game was not climatic, because even though visually it's the same as the final game, gameplay-wise, it's not. You have no freedom. You can't move anywhere you want, and it's just not right. So what we did is we break free the rail. We end up open up the entire area. You can go anywhere you want, and we actually added a surfing area as well, because surf is actually the most fun out of the entire game. We know it. The flying is not fun. So we actually have to bring the surf back just to give you a feeling of excitement again. And all the way until you walk into the light, we kept it free. So you can do it. You can walk anywhere. Even walking into the light, it's your decision until the very end. And I think this freedom is super important of journey, because if you think about all the highs of the journey, whether it's the surfing part or the water temple, or eventually the summit, it's always about the movement and the freedom. So eventually we executed at the end of the third year. In the playtest of 25 players, 3 of them actually have tears in the end, which is kind of amazing, because that's when we know the emotion is actually working. Before that, all the playtests is just like people get lost, people don't know what to do here, or people get stuck. And I think, while we do playtests mostly for usability, testing for emotion is super crucial, but unfortunately, you won't get it until the very end. I really wish there's a better way to test those things. So when we launched the journey, I was very nervous because we spent way too much time to build this game. We extended the project for 2 times, and in the end, we have to put our own money in just to make sure we can finish the game. is all these things going to be worthwhile? You know, we just don't know. You've been close with this game forever. And it was really relieving the first day we launched the game. People started to post on our forum to apologize to each other for not being able to play through the whole game because they had to leave. But they couldn't tell the other person, so they started leaving posts on our forum. And I can never imagine a Call of Duty player do that, but they are the same person, right? So as you play the game, you slowly build up your scarf and cape, and you become more and more veteran player. And I have a bunch of fan art here because I think fan art is a great way to see what the player remembered about your game. And they usually would remember the most intense emotion, and you know, this is what they remembered. They draw hearts at the end of the game. They remember the awe and the sublime beauty of the world. They remember being scared and afraid of the danger. And they also remember struggle together with each other and helping each other to push all the way to the end. And so, before all these award season, I still question, whether it's worth it to push a game to its extreme. Up to today, we have 896 emails from our fans who tell us very personal stories about how they interact with the game. A while back at DICE, I've shared this letter, and I'm just going to read it. Your game practically changed my life. It was the most fun I had with him since he had been diagnosed. My father passed in the spring of 2012, only a few months after his diagnosis. Weeks after his death, I could finally return myself to play video games. I tried to play Journey, and I could barely get past the title screen without breaking down into tears. In my dad's and in my own experience with Journey, it was about him and his journey to the ultimate end. And I believe we encountered your game at the most perfect time. I want to thank you for the game that changed my life, the game whose beauty brings tears to my eyes. Journey is quite possible the best game I've ever played. I continue to play it and always remembering what joys it brought and the joy it continues to bring. I'm Sophia, I'm 15, and your game changed my life for better. And seeing this letter, somehow it brought back to me about this fan art. I think, it is what life is about. We are only here for such a short amount of time. We happen to be all living in the same era, and let's help each other. Let's make each other's life better. And that's why I think, as a game developer, that's the best thing we could do, and that's why I love making games, and that's why, So